Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews on just about every single indie game we can get our hands on. And today we're going to be taking a look at Azure Saga Pathfinder, now on the Nintendo Switch. And while anyone who sees Azure Saga or plays through it can definitely say this game nails 100% of the fundamentals of just about every successful JRPG that's ever been made, whether it's by watching this review or through your own experience with the game, you can probably tell pretty quickly that maybe just nailing the fundamentals isn't all it takes to make a great JRPG. Starting off our story, we see some pretty amazing visuals and are greeted with our main character and side characters, Synch and Noid, as they blast through the universe chasing down Synch's father, who's pretty much been lost in his search for the planet Azure. Azure, being a mythical new world with fresh air and fresh water, would seem to be the only salvation for Synch's people, but during this space-based exploration, something has happened to his craft, causing him to crash on an unknown planet and go into a hypersleep. And awaking after an unknown amount of time in a cryogenic sleep, we find our technologically advanced main characters immersed in the typical fantasy RPG setting of about medieval or dark ages fantasy. And given that bit of a prologue about someone from a space-based culture being marooned on an alien planet, the blending of high technology and high fantasy actually comes across pretty well. And of course, being a main character with an advanced understanding of the universe amidst a high fantasy society, you're obviously going to have a pivotal impact on their evolution and development. And the further you get into the game's main story and greet more and more of its diverse cast, you'll be slowly unveiling the planetary love triangle between the humans, demi-humans, and the hollow. The humans, of course, being a technologically superior race on the planet, with the demi-humans being a native race who are constantly victimized, and the hollow being just pure evil and want everything to die. Along your way through gameplay, though, to see how these stories and mysteries unfold, you'll be greeted with a pretty large cast of characters who pretty much embody the pure sentiments of what is stereotypically the fantasy genre. And whether that be the somewhat impish archer or the constantly crusading paladin who always will do right no matter what, or any number of other waifu-type magic wielders, you'll definitely have the ability to use them in your party in and out of combat as you play. And this brings us away from the story and into the actual combat systems of Azure Saga, which are actually pretty sound. The typical turn-based RPG style 3-on-3 combat system has been spiced up with a couple unique elements in Azure Saga, one of them being a Fury mode, which is pretty much like a limit break from Final Fantasy VII, and the other being a combined magical attack. And while either of these extra methods of combat might be seen as incredibly OP, they are actually pretty well balanced. Fury is a stat that slowly builds up as you take damage or deal damage and can only be used once until it's recharged. The combined magical attacks, on the other hand, do require that all three characters have the same type of magic to use, and is incredibly MP draining, so you won't be able to use it all the time. And besides that, Azure Saga has thrown in one more extra combat element that is pretty cool. Having access to only 3 different party members that you can use in combat at any given time would seem to be pretty limiting. However, Azure Saga has allowed at the beginning of every single turn to be able to swap out any characters you see fit. Meaning that should your tank start to take damage, you can swap in a glass healer and then swap them right back out. However, that being said, as special moves are pretty limited and combined combat takes a huge amount of MP, you might generally find yourself just using brawlers on the front line and smashing that attack button over and over and over. And as you dungeon crawl through unmarked caverns, suffering random encounters over and over and over again, you'll quickly figure out which damage dealers are going to be the most suited for random encounters and how to tweak your party during boss fights. And on that note, game exploration is pretty much limited to navigating between select locations on an overworld map from micro dungeon to micro dungeon. And though the scenery and settings in each of these dungeons are quite unique and really well rendered, having linear, almost point and click style puzzles as well as step and fetch quests that you can't access before an NPC has actually requested an item does make the random encounters with liberally reskinned creature sprites a bit of a pain. However, that being said, having a random encounter about every 20 seconds from the item you've already found to the person who is about to ask you for it and back to that item does mean that you don't actually have to commit to grinding. And even while issues like the lack of diversity in enemy encounters or the very predictable overarching story might be something that a player can really forgive because the mechanics are so solid, there are some issues with the game that do need to be brought up. And primarily that's with character development, as this will probably be seen as the biggest hangup for anyone who actually is a fan of really solid JRPGs. Regardless of the diversity of the characters that you actually encounter throughout the game, each one of them is Disney-style typecast, and just like the cookie-cutter game setting, it makes every single one of the interactions or game plot twists incredibly predictable. So playing with the same group of characters that will literally make the same decisions in every single encounter for the next 25 to 26 hours can feel a little bit boring. And other than that, there are definitely still some localization issues with the text, and even a couple minor bugs that really can be quite irritating. At one point during the game when I was trying to fish, the fishing window immediately closed out and started playing the encounter music on loop about every second. And despite going into the menu and reloading the game, it continued until I went to the switch menu and actually shut the game off and hard booted. Overall though, it's crazy to think that a game like Azure Saga Pathfinder could have so much right, and just about every time it gets something right, it gets something else wrong. And while their inspiration to combine elements from some of the most famous JRPGs that have ever been produced is definitely the size that would be suitable for a console, the developer's experience developing mobile games definitely comes through in the feel of the game itself. Navigation through the game's menus, the character sprites and the way they look, and even how they're animated during combat all do feel uniquely mobile. And while anyone who actually has any experience with JRPGs or was a fan of them will have a lot of meta knowledge to pull from that might spoil a lot of the game, somehow it actually probably would come across as pretty fresh and innovative to a new player. So if you do want to get your feet wet with RPGs or JRPGs because you don't really have that much experience, Azure Saga Pathfinder might be a pretty decent game. Its linear story progression and predictable nature of the gameplay might be something that allow you to actually catch yourself up into it, and the stereotypical cast is definitely going to offer you a wealth of characters to potentially bond with. However, if you are an existing fan of JRPGs, this is going to feel a little bit stale and definitely a little bit mobile if you're a hardcore console gamer. And while I definitely don't like to end on a negative note with my reviews, that does about wrap up the review of Azure Saga now on the Nintendo Switch. So if you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, feel free to throw me a like or comment to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indies coming out literally every single day, so there's always going to be something new to find right here. But since I can only cover a few games a week, if you want an update on which reviews might be coming out next, you can follow us on Twitter. But anyway, this has been Budget Gamers. As always, thanks for watching.